Hi, I'm Ari, I'm the Oak Witch, and in today's video I'm going to be discussing how we fearmonger beginners in our community. I just wanted to have a quick let's discuss video for this episode because it's something I've been thinking about for a while. It's something which I see quite frequently on specifically online spaces in our community, so I can see it on Discord servers, you see it on things like TikTok and Twitter, and it's something I wanted to give my opinions on because this is a beginner focused channel and obviously get a lot of beginners who watch my channel, and what I wanted to present to you is my opinion on this discussion, my thoughts on how we can better treat, how we interact with beginners. There's a lot of ways which people tend to instill fear into beginners. It's all about people who try to establish a sort of authoritative power dynamic in the way they educate, and I think the way that people do this isn't helpful nor actually good for beginners in terms of getting people on the right track in their craft. So I think what I want to do is just highlight some examples that I see, and in the comments, if you see this also, if you've had this experienced, and if you have any other examples that I haven't mentioned, maybe tell me in the comments. I'd love to open this discussion. I think of ways in which we can identify this better, perhaps with others or within ourselves, and how we can move forward in how we actually interact with beginners in a more healthy way. I'll just dive into an example. Something which I see quite frequently in online spaces is how we talk about spirit work and deity work. I think it's so misleading to push this narrative that spirit work or deity work is like advanced. It's an advanced practice, that beginners will find themselves in really dangerous places if they even touch spirit work. I don't necessarily think this is true, and the way that people talk about this online, and people do say this concept of, you know, if you like spirit work is scary, it's dangerous, it's this whole thing, if you step into it as a beginner, blah blah blah, all these awful things will happen to you. But I think this steps really quickly into just fear-mongering and exaggerating. So if we look at the concept of spirit work, right, in which deity work can fall under, it's such a broad term, right? Spirit work means just so many different things, right? So to say that spirit work on the whole is an advanced practice is not really true. That misses a lot of cultural nuances and a lot of tradition-based nuances. So many different ways in which we can approach spirit work from so many different perspectives and angles, that to paint it all with a brush of have to be advanced is not necessarily correct. And I think it's really damaging to portray this to beginners, to sort of scare them into thinking, oh, I cannot go anywhere near spirit work just yet because all these things will happen, I'm just not prepared, blah blah blah. Like, yes, I'm not saying to throw research and preparedness out of the water. I think it's important to be at least knowledgeable, have foundational skills down before you step into spirit work. Not denying that at all. But I do think that it is misleading to portray as if it's like you're going to get in some real trouble if you even think about spirit work, because this isn't true. There's a lot of emphasis between like deity work and deity worship. In my experience, in order to sort of have deities do stuff for you, you have to still build some form of relationship. They're not like random correspondences you can pluck out and then they'll just do something for you. Not sure it really works like that anyway. So you do have to have that sort of relationship building, and with that comes worship. And, you know, the way we even look at worship can sort of be looked at through a bit of a biased lens. Some people's experience of worship comes from, you know, trauma, and that obviously is valid, and it's not something which I think anyone should just dismiss arbitrarily. If it really bothers you to sort of engage in that concept of worship, then you don't need to do deity work. You don't really need to do that to be a witch, to practice magic. You just simply don't need to. This concept of worship doesn't necessarily entail this like authoritative position that you're praying to. It doesn't necessarily have to be like that. A lot of people can worship deities but see them more on like a mutual worship, that mutual veneration of each other, that relationship you're building, you know? I give you offerings, you do something for me. It's a mutual exchange. A lot of people see it like that. So I think the way we can interact with spirits doesn't necessarily have to be a certain way. When we look at as well, going back to this concept of deity work being really advanced, I think things like veneration and worship can fall under that concept. So when we're looking at, you have to be advanced to work with deities, there are certain cultures where you're brought into this concept of worship, of veneration, of petitioning to deities or a deity, from a young age. You can look at Hinduism as a clear example of that. And a perspective, I think, from a Hellenist, which I thought was really good on this subject, is Fell's video, which I've linked before on this channel, and I'll link it again because I really, really enjoyed their perspective, and I thought it was so important to think about things from different perspectives to sort of get those cultural nuances, especially when we're looking at more specific traditions within our community. So when we're saying broad sweeping statements like spirit work is advanced, we can think, is that true for everybody? There is more nuance there, and sometimes saying these things doesn't always provide the best education for beginners. In this concept of spirit work, I certainly think if you're going to start, for example, calling onto spirits, I do think there is a certain level of, for example, knowing what banishing is, cleansing, all those sort of like skills that sort of people push as the basics. I think there's merit to that idea, and I think it's important to sort of be knowledgeable in what you're dealing with before you deal with it, right? That is true for both mundane, non-magical situations, activities, as well as magical activities. So, that same logic does apply to the spirit world as well. So I think that's where people sort of tend to get at when we're talking about this concept of spirit work, that you do have to have some level of experience doing some other things before you get to that. So I think that's the narrative people try to push, but some people try to push it too far. You end up scaring beginners, instilling fear for whatever reasons. It seems to mostly be from trying to sort of instill that like educational authoritative position, like, I know better, so don't do this. I think we need to be very careful with how we educate, because there are certain ways in which people do, and then it ends up being actually a little bit toxic. So this leads on to this concept of safety, mundane over magical. This is something which is talked about so much, and it's something which I've spoken about before in a prior Let's Discuss, but something which I want to sort of reiterate is the concept of people pushing the basics, pushing being safe all the time. And yes, I'm not trying to say we should throw safety out the window, but some people take this line of thinking too far, and what I would like to, I guess, emphasize on this channel is that experience will be your best teacher, and with experience comes mistakes. And let me be clear, if you truly are on this journey for a more long-term situation, then honestly, you will make loads of mistakes. And I think what people, like me on this channel are trying to do is help people make these mistakes more safely, more educated mistakes, I guess. So you're going into it being as prepared as you can be, but know that also sometimes you just have to try things out. Sometimes you really just have to put on your safety hat and just go for it, and just go with the flow of what happens. And sometimes what does happen is mistakes. So I think there is merit to the idea of, learning from these mistakes and trying better next time. And that's the whole process of learning a new skill, learning a new hobby. You're not going to get things right perfectly straight away. Especially this is a practice. This is a magical praxis. So when you're looking at the concept of practice, you know, no one is perfect on their first go. You will make mistakes, and this is no doubt that will happen. I've made so many mistakes, so many things I've gotten wrong, which I'm learning and figuring out, and I'm still figuring things out. So I think there's this really weird misconception that, like, you know, you have to be as safe as possible and don't do anything unless you're 100% safe, and, you know, and you're prepared for every outcome and blah, blah, blah. And, you know, people really, really push this idea of, like, you know, telling beginners to don't practice until you know everything. Like, I'm sorry, but you just won't. You won't know everything until you practice, you know? So I do think, yes, research, have a foundational knowledge in something before you do it, you know, like, that's true for many skills, right? But I do think also that sometimes people push it too far. Some people put too much fear into beginners that, like, if you don't know everything about this, then you are, you know, you're a fraud, you're an imposter, and you don't know anything, and, you know, you can't practice before you know everything. This is why we get so much imposter syndrome. And I think that it's worth noting that this is your own journey. This is your own spiritual experience. This is your thing, you know, and your journey will be subjective, one, to you. So two, you need to experience that in order to get that introspective understanding of what this is to you. And you will only figure that out when you start practicing, when you start experiencing, and when you really get into this rhythm of your practice. So really is something to bear in mind. I'm not saying to just not research and just, you know, screw it, do whatever you want and figure it out as you go along. Like, I'm not saying to do that, but I do think it's worth noting that there's only so much that books can tell you. You know, you can read a book, anyone can read a book on witchcraft, and reading that book alone doesn't necessarily make them a witch. It's about putting that book into practice. That's why I love giving book recommendations. And when you're looking at the exercises, you know, do the exercises in the books, okay? Like, put that knowledge to the test in your practice. That's the whole point of experiencing your journey and your path and progressing forward. That will only happen when you practice, when you experience. I really dislike when people are so quick to invalidate beginners who are just starting out on their journey and are practicing and are very quick to sort of be like, oh, well, have you done this? Make sure you're being safe. Make sure you do this. Like, yes, it's important to, if someone's just being clearly reckless, then I do think it's important to just be like, oh, well, hang on a second, you know, perhaps put it into a bit of perspective. But what I see online so much is people really, really scaring beginners, and I do think sometimes, you know, you just need to let people make mistakes. Sometimes you just need to let it happen, you know. So I hope my perspective comes across a bit coherently. Following on from this, I guess, is the idea of people, I see this happens so much on Discord servers, you cannot imagine, people dismissing other people's, like, signs and messages received from whatever spirit, whatever divinity, you know, whatever, like, source it comes from. But people being very quick to sort of be like, oh, well, that doesn't really, you know, mean anything. So what I want to break down is, one, as I said before, witchcraft, your spirituality, your magical practice in whatever form it looks like, is your own personal, individual experience. That is the whole point. Whatever goal your craft is, your magical practice is something which is your own. And thus the experiences you have are your own. Okay, yes, it's lovely having these online communities, these in-person communities where we're sharing our practice, we're relating to each other. You know, for example, this concept of shared personal gnosis, having this, like, connection to other people, specifically relating to your magical practice, you know, coven work. Okay, we have this sort of group shared sort of experience, but I think what is also important to reflect upon is this idea of it being your journey. So when we're looking at, for example, signs, omens, messages, how we interpret them is going to look so differently to each individual. for some people might be a bit more skeptical, might be a bit more focused on things which you really cannot explain. You know, something which is really like, you know, some people just have more of a skeptical mind, and interpreting signs and omens through that lens for them really works for them. Some people are a lot more fluid in the mundane and magical process. Me personally, I kind of toe in between the two. But some people really see magic and spirit, you know, from an animistic sense in everything. So whatever signs come across to you, you know, you can interpret that through that lens of, well, you know, I just think that's magical, like, because I just think it is. And that's fine. Some other people probably look at that and go, yeah, well, that was literally just a bird throughout the sky, it doesn't mean anything. But, you know, if that's how you interpret that situation, that's completely valid. But if someone else sees that bird and goes, oh, that's that specific species that links to this deity, which I'm literally researching right now, that really means something to me. That is also okay, because it's their journey, it's their personal experience. You know, who is anyone to invalidate that? If that means something to them, that means something to them, and that's okay. So a lot of what I see online in Discord communities is mundane over magical. Make sure you're looking at the mundane before the magical. And okay, yes, definitely in certain situations that is important. For example, before you step into candle magic, it might be worth knowing proper fire safety. If, for example, if you're going to do a really elaborate fire sort of candle spell and you've got a lot of flames, got a lot of candles, got a lot of dried herbs around you, got a lot of like fabric on your altar, and you know it's going to get a little bit wild, you might want to, for example, have a bucket of water next to you. You might want to research what fire safety implements you can sort of put around you just in case something goes wrong. Knowing how to correctly manage certain types of fires, like grease fires, it's really important to know, so you don't cause damage to not just things but to yourself or to other people. It's very, very important. Yes, I think that certainly is merit, and I'm not discrediting that type of mundane over magical, because that is very, very important to understand. And especially if you're a beginner, you might not know that stuff. You know, if you're young, you might not understand that really as well, and I don't think those are mistakes you really want to make, because they are reckless mistakes. But when we're getting into people pushing mundane over magical, like interpreting messages and signs and stuff, what I see is a lot of people saying, oh, well, you know, that's just mundane, you know, that doesn't have anything to do with things. And like, it might not, you know, you might very well be right. But I think a lot of people tend to not consider that process of figuring those things out, and also their own experience of how they view the magical world, the spirit world, is something that they have to figure out. And I don't think it's very fair to sort of push this mundane over magical really, really hard, as much as I see it, because I think it is this concept of trying to establish this like fear hierarchy of like, I know better, you know, don't do this, you're doing it wrong, blah blah blah. Like, I don't know, maybe this is just me ranting, maybe this is just me having a little pet peeve moment. But I think it's such a shame. I think it's important to consider a non-magical perspective. Certainly, I think there needs to be a sort of balance to that, but I also think that a lot of people are very quick to dismiss beginners' sort of beginner excitement and stepping into the pagan, the magical, the witchcraft world and getting so excited about things and really like I remember doing it. I remember being like that. I remember it being so exciting and it was really wonderful. And you know, sometimes I think, God, like I kind of want that excitement again. Makes it sound so depressing, but like makes me think sometimes like that beginner excitement is so like innocent, so pure, and I think that's really lovely. Of course, ignorance is not always bliss. You do need to sort of ground yourself, but I think sometimes some people are maybe too grounded and try to push that on other people and sort of like ruin other people's excitement. I think that's something we need to reflect on a bit more. This also leads into the concept of how we infantilize. Is that how you pronounce it? Infantilize? I feel like that's not how you pronounce it. How we talk down to beginners and how we assume that all beginners are immature or children or just like don't know anything in like at all, like not even like non-magical knowledge. We kind of treat them like they're complete idiots, and that's not very fair. You know, I think it's very easy as someone who's more experienced or more educated to see a beginner being a bit like what you may consider cringe or what you may consider like uneducated or like they're being a bit reckless. It's very easy to interpret a lot of that like beginner excitement as like recklessness or just being careless from the lens of someone who's more educated and is a bit maybe more grounded in just years of experience and knowledge. So, you know, I get eye rolling a little bit at some beginners who perhaps just are figuring things out, but hey, they're figuring things out. It's all right for you, it's all right for us. We've gone through all of that, but you need to let people go through that. I just think that's what I see on Discord communities so much. I love Discord communities. I have my own, I have a few, and I love that concept of really helping each other out, helping out beginners and building relationships with people. I love it. I'm on Discord all the time. And I think it's great, but I also think some people perhaps approach it through an agenda which I don't think is necessarily very helpful. I think some people sort of take these educational role positions just to establish some form of superiority. I'm not trying to shade, I'm not trying to jab at anyone, I'm not trying to come across as like not guilty of any of this. I think I just want to open this conversation, identify these things, and perhaps let people reflect on these things, which I don't really see talked about a great amount publicly. So it's worth considering, you know, why do you want to educate? I personally opened this channel because I was seeing other people make witchcraft content and I saw it and I thought, I think I could probably say things differently. I think I could have probably have worded that better, and I think I could provide a new perspective which might be similar, but from a approach which I think is perhaps more helpful, and specifically looking at it like, oh, you know, what would I have wanted when I was a child trying to research paganism and witchcraft and coming up with these like random sites from specifically a Wiccan perspective that I wasn't really understanding, to be honest. So that's why I wanted to open this channel, because I really wanted to provide education that was, one, free, and it was accessible to beginner in a really simple way. You know, I think a lot of the education I was seeing was a bit like superfluous, and I think that it was just a little bit unnecessary the way that people were sort of educating. And I think sometimes, and I think I just saw it like, I think there just needs to be someone who just says it as it is, who just takes the content and saying, this is what it is, this is why we do it, this is how you can do it, and have that approach of like, but remember, this is also your own experience. So that's what I'm trying to do here. And I think sometimes we need to ask ourselves, why are we doing what we're doing? You know, why are you educating? Are you educating people because you want to provide education, or you just want to establish that you are well educated? I think people need to consider why you're doing this, because that's something which I see quite a lot in Discord communities. Moving swiftly on, I think something else which I see quite a lot, which was actually said to me in a Discord comment, which inspired this Let's Discuss, and it was someone discussing how people say, oh, people push protection so much, and this kind of goes into the concept of like, you know, the safety sort of stuff I was talking about before, but people push protection magic so much that people fail to consider that there's maybe too much protection. And I think this is actually quite a good point. I think it is a very good point. I think there is this notion of actually, do you need protection for every single thing? If we're looking at spirit work, for example, if you're going to start, engaging in spirits, if you really want to actually have those experiences, have that communicative experience, then perhaps if you've put too many protections so that like no spirits can enter your house at all or your person, then actually you might not be able to communicate with any spirits. So that's one example of this concept of there being too much protection, but I think it's something worth considering. So, but that underlying sort of theme of people pushing one perspective so much, maybe too much, and note that like, there are different perspectives, different ways, different traditions that look at things differently that people fail to consider, and that is something which I think should be talked about more. Nuance. Okay, to be fair, even in our community, people throw around this concept of nuance this, nuance that, but so even that has nuance. But it is important to at least recognise that when we're coming at something from our own perspective, hands up, this channel, what I'm talking to you about, how I practice magic, that's going to come through in the education that I provide. I am a folk witch, I am an animist, I'm a polytheist, so there are philosophical approaches I have which will come through in the education I provide. I try to be objective, I try to educate in a way which I think is more helpful to the broader beginner witch, in a way that a witch from any sort of background can sort of still take something from the education I provide. But obviously there still is a bias I have, because I am a witch who practices witchcraft, so that's, something which I do. And that's obviously going to come through in some form or another, right? I do think it's worth considering, like, your own perspective in the way that you educate. And of course that's going to just happen, but I think some people tend to forget that that is just their perspective, that is their way, and your way isn't the only way to practice magic or witchcraft or be a pagan or worship divinity in whatever form. Your way is not the only way, and I don't think people should be pushing that either, hence why we talk about nuance, tradition, cultural nuance. It exists, right? And to sort of push this education that I see happen so fiercely on online spaces, remember to do this, oh, you better not be doing this, make sure you're doing this, don't do this before you do this. Okay, that might be true for this one sort of version of witchcraft which you perform, which you practice, but from a different culture, from a different tradition of magic, one may look at that and go, yeah, that's not correct, that's not like necessarily true. So yeah, I think this just links overall to this concept of how we treat beginners, how we educate. Are we educating by fear-mongering? Are we providing spaces which are actually safe, which actually hold conversations, which take into everyone's perspectives? Are we being inclusive? And I think that is the underlying message I want to sort of present here. Are we being inclusive of different groups? Because I think when we get into this concept of fear-mongering, it comes from a place of people trying to push one narrative as, as the only narrative, and then you're like removing seats at the table for other people, for other sides, other perspectives. I think we really need to be careful of that. So I guess this leads to a question, food for thought. The people who are educating currently, should they? I think it's worth considering. So that is the end of my Let's Discuss for now. I didn't have a script for this, as it's probably obvious. I just wanted to talk about something which I've spoken to friends about, and we've sort of come to this mutual agreement in these groups that I've spoken to, and I just wanted to open it up to YouTube because, I have a lot of beginners here. I have a channel specifically for beginners. What I want to make sure on my channel at least is that it really is a considerate space for people of all ages or backgrounds or cultural backgrounds or traditional backgrounds, any background of experience. You know, I want it to be an inclusive space. What I aim to do in my education is, you know, of course I can't help but have my own background, my own perspective in which I sort of educate, but I do hope that it is education which I think can still be inclusive of different things, because I think the overall theme is that, yeah, this is your own personal experience and no one can take that away from you. And it's something which I think beginners should think about more, thinking about witchcraft through the lens of this being your own journey, which will progress and will change and will adapt, and that's so completely fine and encouraged. But it's not something that's really pushed a lot, not in like witch talk spaces when people just talk about this concept of this like eclectic witchcraft. People are sort of like sharing spells and things that like are sort of pushed in a really like objective sort of universal sort of perspective, but like I'm not sure that's entirely accurate, if that makes sense. But yes, I'll stop waffling on. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, I really appreciate it. And yeah, come chat to me in the comments. You know, what do you think about this topic, this conversation? Is this something that you've experienced, perhaps firsthand? Is this something which you've seen happen online? Do you disagree with me? It's okay if you do, and I would love to talk to you about it, and perhaps, you know, maybe I'll have my mind changed. So yeah, I would love to talk about it in the comments, or even on my Discord server if you want to come join that. And yeah, I will see you in the next one. Thanks for watching. Bye.